Welcome back to the United Stand. I'm joined today by the brilliant Ben Jacobs. Lots to go through. We're talking strikers. We're looking at Ollie Watkins. We're going to go through the Garnacho deal. Why is there a delay? Is that going to progress forward? But of course, get the like button hit. Make sure you are subscribing to the channel and you've got the bell notifications turned on. But good afternoon, Ben. How are you, mate?
Good afternoon. Yeah, busy times. Alexander Isak asking to leave Newcastle United. Luis Diaz bid coming in for Liverpool. Man United making fresh contact for Ollie Watkins with Aston Villa. It's that time of the window, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. And I suppose first question, are Man United in for Isak?
Well, the finances probably preclude that. I think Isak wants about 300,000 a week. That's my understanding. And in addition to go and play Champions League football, he's well paid at Newcastle and he's got Champions League football at Newcastle. So my expectation is if anyone prizes him away, it will be a club next season with Champions League football that can meet that wage valuation. Liverpool are, of course, the ones to watch, even though they've signed Hugo Ekitike. Saudi Arabia are keen. Al Hilal are prepared to bid if they get any encouragement, but we're not yet at a concrete position of talks between Isak and Al Hilal. But I know that the Saudi side are going to be ambitious. And then you never know with other Premier League clubs. Arsenal are obviously finalising the deal for Victor Gyökeres. Chelsea could add another attacker, but what kind of attacker remains to be seen. They are working on a deal for Xavi Simons at the moment at Leipzig. But if Nicholas Jackson and Christopher Nkunku depart, Chelsea are definitely going to add another attacker. It's just not clear exactly what kind of profile. Siemens is versatile. Alejandro Garnacho on the left-hand side is more of a winger. But Chelsea did go for Isak 12 months ago. They made an inquiry anyway. It didn't lead to a formal bid. So I think we're going to get more clarity on Alexander Isak's future in the next few days. But obviously it's important this particular juncture now, because 2 days ago we were told it was Newcastle resting Isak. Yesterday we were told he wasn't training alone, at least not for a full session, and it was down to a minor thigh injury. But now it's clear that Isak has said, hang on a minute, I don't want to go to Singapore. I want to assess all options. And that's where we're at with that particular saga. And it will be a saga that could run right the way through this window.
It certainly could. Obviously, from a United perspective, we all saw your tweet. We all saw your post a few hours ago regarding Ollie Watkins. That said, the Telegraph now suggesting that it's off and that Watkins isn't for sale. What's your latest understanding regarding a potential move of Ollie Watkins joining Manchester United this summer?
Yeah, I was getting a similar feeling from Aston Villa in the sense they don't really want to sell Ollie Watkins and they would never progress with the deal without finding a replacement. But it doesn't mean that the talks haven't happened. And naturally, reporting that Watkins isn't for sale and that was told to Manchester United only backs up our story from earlier that there were talks. So the clubs have been engaged. And once again, I come back to Alexander Isak. Newcastle say he's not for sale. Liverpool might still try, and so might Saudi. Wesley Fofana was not for sale. He still ended up joining Chelsea. Yohan Wissa is not for sale. Newcastle are trying for his signature. So I'm always wary about being that categorical personally. Villa's position now is that they either don't want to sell, or if they find a replacement, the valuation of Ollie Watkins is at £60 million. Manchester United will not move at that number, but later in the window, you can never say never. The price could drop, and Manchester United are not necessarily of the belief that they're totally wasting their time engaging over Ollie Watkins. So we'll have to see if it develops. We need to be respectful to Aston Villa, but not for sale now doesn't always mean not for sale in a day, a week, a month, and we have countless examples of that. And the most high profile is Alexander Isak. Several times when I've reported interest in Alexander Isak, it's been naturally shot down by passionate Newcastle fans who I respect, saying not for sale, not for sale, not for sale. But can a player keep being not for sale if that player wants a move? So with Ollie Watkins, we'll have to wait and see. I think Villa's position is quite genuine. He's going to be a tough player to prize away. And certainly if that number remains at 60 million, Manchester United are not going to move at this stage. But if the price drops, you never know.
Is there the chance here? I mean, well, actually, we'll come back to Garnacho in a minute. We'll come back to that conversation. If the lap was plan A, Gyökeres plan B, Ekitike plan C, Watkins plan D, what's plan E for Man United as far as you're aware? If we can't get Watkins, who sort of does appear to be the next striker we're moving to, if we can't land him, Are there other names that you could see the club moving towards starting conversation with in the coming days and weeks?
I don't think it's necessarily plan A, B, C, D, etc. with Victor Gyökeres. As far as I'm aware, it was Sporting offering the player to Manchester United, not the other way around. So Manchester United naturally had appreciation for Gyökeres because the manager of Manchester United used to manage him, but it never led to a bid. And Manchester United sources insist they never planned on placing a bid. So I think that push towards Manchester United was all via Sporting to create some competitive tension to get the Arsenal deal over the line, because Manchester United insist categorically they never placed a bid, nor did they plan to. It was different with Hugo Ekitike because they did make a genuine inquiry in a move driven by Christopher Vivell, but Liverpool was the player's wanted destination. And as a consequence, there was never any realistic possibility of Manchester United muscling in there. The more concrete targets that have been deemed as feasible internally are Ollie Watkins, hence the fresh talks. And again, we have to respect Aston Villa in all of this. Nicholas Jackson, but Manchester United sources say they're unlikely to make a bid at this stage. And I think unlikely, to be really clear, because people will cling to that, is based upon the fact that Chelsea's valuation is high, not necessarily based upon the assumption that they're not interested in Nicholas Jackson, because there is clear respect for the player. So if, for example, Chelsea suddenly pivot from Xavi Simons to Alejandro Garnacho, then maybe the whole complexion of a deal changes and they start to ramp up their efforts on Nicholas Jackson. But at the moment, all indications are that it's not that likely they're placing a bid, and we'll have to wait and see whether that changes. And then Benjamin Sesko is the one I really think we should be keeping an eye on, because as clubs get their strikers and Sesko has less options and therefore Leipzig have less of a bidding war, my understanding is that that price will drop from the 83 million euros, which is his performance-related release clause, down to around 70 million euros, which is still a large amount of money, but it would be seen by Manchester United as better value than Watkins, not on the pitch, because Watkins is clearly a quality player that could give you an instant impact, but it's about age, it's about high ceiling, it's about amortization. So if you go for Sesko, you can naturally give him a long-term deal and amortize by 5. I think it unlikely, given the age of Ollie Watkins, that you would offer a 5-year deal, because then there's a danger that there comes a point in time after 2-3 years where you want to move Watkins on and maybe back in the same position, like with several Manchester United players now, where they're well paid and they don't want to leave. With Sesko, if you pay the same amount as Watkins, because 70 million euros is about 60 million quid, you would feel that that amortization and that long-term contract might over time give you better value for money, even though some fans may argue Watkins is a goal scorer for now and Sesko perhaps for now, but definitely for the future. And I think the other factor in all of this for Manchester United is because they've got two proven Premier League players in Brian Mbeumo and Matheus Cunha, and they're going to be capable of chipping in. And the expectation is that they can both get into double figures. Maybe Manchester United can go for a number 9 who's a little bit younger. And as a consequence, Sesko may come into the forefront of Manchester United's thinking. Again, like with Ekitike, Christopher Vivell is the person driving this move. He knows the player well. There's no negotiations with Leipzig at the moment, but it wouldn't surprise me if Manchester United pivot to Sesko over the course of the coming weeks, especially if that price does drop.
Yes, I think it's an interesting one for Man United. I think there's a lot of stress in our fan base, and I can see it in the comments today. By the way, viewers, we are going to go to your super chats. We won't ignore them. We'll come to them later in the show. There's a lot of stress in the United fan base because of an article that came out last night that said essentially that the hierarchy at United have sort of conceded that we won't have a striker for that opening game of the season against Arsenal, which is in around 3 weeks' time. Is that a fair assessment, or do you think it's not that cut and dry yet? Could there still be developments in the next 3 weeks that see, a number 9 join us on pre-season tour, come in and do some work before that massive opening game against Arsenal?
Yeah, they want to try and get their targets early, but they won't be reckless. So staying disciplined in the market is going to be important. And clearly outgoings are going to have to fund the number 9. So it'd be one thing if they want to go down the line of Alexander Mitrovic on a loan. That could be a possibility to the market more generally if Hilal add another striker, because remember, Saudi's got foreign quotas. So if you're going to add a striker, they'll be trying to get rid of Mitrovic, and like John Duran, there might be a loan. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is the one offering himself to Manchester United rather than the other way around. But again, if you get late in the window, exploring cheaper options, temporary options, or the loan market might become a possibility for Manchester United. And who knows, that might be in addition to signing a younger or more expensive number 9, such as Shesko, or at the older age extreme, Watkins. And then I think we have to understand that if Manchester United want to hedge their bets on one of these more expensive targets, they are going to have to bring in some money. So this is the sort of balance. Do you try and raise the capital? If you can't later in the window, do you pivot to a more temporary or budget option? I think there's a very realistic chance. Alternatively, if they can sell Garnacho in particular quickly and get that pure profit on the books, it might allow them to fund a number 9, which is obviously the next priority. So it is quite a fluid situation because it's still a long window. But there's no doubt Manchester United can't just allow Rashford, as they've done, to join Barcelona, even though that's a very strong wage saving. Do the same for Anthony. Sell Jadon Sancho for 20-25 million. It's not enough to go in the market and start bidding for a Benjamin Sesko. So I still think, speaking to sources, that it is the Garnacho sale and getting good money and quickly that's really going to unlock Manchester United's window and tell them which kind of caliber and at which kind of cost of number 9 they can genuinely and feasibly go for.
That segues into that situation with Garnacho well, because it's been, why has it been so quiet from a United perspective? We know that Chelsea are interested. We keep hearing Chelsea's name come up. Are there any other clubs that are interested? Is it something that feels like it might accelerate soon? Because I think from our perspective as United fans, the Garnacho one was a deal that we thought may move along a little bit quicker. The same with Anthony after such a good time at Real Betis, where in fact the Rashford deal that we thought would take till deadline day has happened. So what's going on with both Garnacho and Anthony's potential exits from Manchester United, Ben?
Yeah, I think with Anthony, he's holding out for Real Betis, and you can understand why, because he enjoyed his time there. And not only that, he watches Marcus Rashford get a loan. And I think when players see that, they're going to be knocking on the club door and saying, we want a similar kind of deal. And I think Betis will also be quite encouraged by the fact that Marcus Rashford was allowed and quickly to go on loan, even though 6 weeks ago, the asking price was £40 million and Manchester United preferred a permanent sale. But obviously the flip side is once you give that one concession, maybe that's the exception to the rule. And you're even harder on Anthony, saying, because Rashford's gone on loan, we need your exit to now be permanent. So Betis are trying to understand the situation. And Anthony is really pushing and holding out to try and go back to that club, which is probably the roadblock to a quick exit at this point. If he doesn't get Betis in the next week or two, then maybe he has to accept that there are other options on the table, and then things start moving. With Garnacho, the problem has always been the price, less so the player side and agreeing terms. We know that Napoli felt 50 million euros maximum was their top end valuation, and that was in January. And since then, they haven't returned with any meaningful bid, because Manchester United are basically quoting them 70 million euros or 60 million pounds. And I can understand it from Manchester United's perspective, because they've got to play suitors at their own game when they've been the bidding club. So if they've struggled to get Brian and Bumo and eventually had to pay over 70 million, if they're looking at Mateus Cunha at 62.5 million, then of course in Manchester United's eyes, Alejandro Garnacho, being young and having a high ceiling, would be worth 60 million pounds. But that number seems to be too high for suitors at the table. So it will be interesting if Chelsea push forwards. They will have a slightly inflated price, no doubt, for Nicholas Jackson. Manchester United, the same for Garnacho. It's the same for Christopher Nkunku at roughly 60 million pounds. So if there's two-way business, it might be easier to, for example, send Garnacho to Chelsea and then discuss either a Jackson or an Nkunku. But Chelsea for now are in talks for Xavi Simons. So it remains to be seen whether they escalate their interest in Garnacho. The other stumbling block with Garnacho is the fact that right now, maybe less so in January, he's prioritising staying in the Premier League. So it's going to need a Chelsea, Possibly some say Spurs, but it's not developing at this stage, and definitely Aston Villa. And those are the three that I keep hearing. And if one of those clubs really pushes for Garnacho, it could happen quickly. But if they don't, the player may let more weeks pass, because his number one priority at this stage of the window is to stay in the Premier League.
Could there be the possibility, you mentioned Villa, we like the idea of Watkins, that's why we've made a number of different types of inquiries this summer. Could there be the possibility there of some, it will never be a swap deal on paper because clubs don't like to lose the income, but could there be some, a little bit like with Chelsea, we keep hearing if they want Garnacho, there could be an Anthony situation. Could there be a scenario where Villa and Man United work on a deal where both clubs are happy, both clubs get a player?
It's possible. I mean, these kind of deals are not as prevalent, are they, as 12 months ago? And as you rightly say, they're separate rather than swap deals. And the reason for that very clearly is because you get the money for the one that you sell on the books in this financial year, and we're still in a near miss period for the last financial year. So if you can show you were working on the deal in June or May, then ultimately you might be able to actually declare it on 24-25, but definitely 25-26 financial year. And then the one that you buy, you amortize by dividing it by the contract length of up to 5 years. In other words, if you have a 6-7 year contract, you can only now divide by 5 on the books. So it's very palatable to have these mirrored deals as they're known. And there might be a possibility because Villa want to strengthen on the left-hand side. But what we have to say at the moment is that Manchester United inquired about Ollie Watkins and Villa didn't in that conversation inquire back. And we know now there was also a loan offer for Emi Martinez as well, which was a big surprise, the actual nature of the offer, even though we know that Martinez and Manchester United has been rumbling on for quite some time. And I'm not aware in those conversations for Watkins and for Emi Martinez that Villa sort of countered and said, what about Garnacho? Perhaps later in the window they will. But at this stage, I would view all of the names in relation to Manchester United and Villa as separate. Manchester United like the idea of Emi Martinez in theory, but Andre Onana's not been told he's surplus to requirements. You got Sané Lamens as well, if they go more for a number 2 that's young. But for now, I think Manchester United are just scouring the market and starting initial contact with various clubs, predominantly for this number 9. And it's not that much to get excited about on a Garnacho exit at this stage. Let's wait and see if anybody places a bid. But I think the Premier League clubs that are interested in Garnacho are intentionally waiting a week or two because they feel once we get into the early part of August, maybe Manchester United will start panicking about the possibility that Garnacho will just stay at the club. And that's maybe when the price will start to drop. And Garnacho at 45 or 50 million, there'll be several takers. Garnacho at 60 million, there's been no formal offers yet.
Thank you for that comprehensive update, Ben. We'll do a few super chats here. Someone, if we could put that up on the screen, please, says, calling it right now, we will not have an experienced 9, at which point everyone here is going to have to go at the unexperienced players and bloody wonder why.
Yeah, but what I would say to that is experience is not only in age, it's in number of games, and experience is a collective thing that you want in your team. So have Manchester United brought in more Premier League experience? Yes, through Mbumo, who could lead the line, through Cunha, who could lead the line, and they can both play central or get wide. Bruno Fernandes is equally as experienced and a source of goals too. So when you add it all up, Manchester United have more experience than they did come the end of last season or when they lost the Europa League final to Spurs. And I don't think every player needs to be looked out of context as just an entity. So in other words, you go Rasmus Højlund, inexperienced and out of form, Joshua Zirkzee, inexperienced and ultimately not the exact lead number 9 that necessarily Ruben Amorim is looking for, because he's valued more due to the fact that he can play anywhere across the front line. So what Manchester United need is goals. And granted, when you buy experience, whatever the actual age of the player, that tends to translate into consistent performances. But there is a logic if you just put a number 9 in that box and they're served by Cunha, they're served by Mount, they're served by Bruno Fernandes, they're served by Mbumo, etc. That number 9 will thrive. And I wouldn't underestimate, therefore, the possibility of Højlund if he stays, or definitely Xerxes, because my expectation is he'll remain at Manchester United, thriving and stepping up and improving their numbers because of the dual experience that Mbeumo and Cunha brings. So yes, if you just look at the options, or if you only look at last season, you definitely go buy experience, don't take a risk, ideally even by proven Premier League quality. And that is where Ollie Watkins might come in. But if you add into this team the chemistry and the experience of the two players that I mentioned, maybe any number 9, younger, older, Premier League from a foreign club, perhaps that number 9 can thrive. And I think Manchester United are more thinking about who's the right system fit, chemistry fit, personality fit, than only feeling like they need someone who is already a proven Premier League goal scorer. And definitely the two arrivals of the number 10s will change their perspective on the kinds of number 9 that they're prepared to look at.
Makes perfect sense. There's the top super chat, please, for Harry Sinclair that says, I know he's expensive, but we absolutely have to get Isak. I don't care what it takes. Just get it done. He would be transformative. Get it done ASAP. He also then says in a follow-up super chat, I think it's important to put this one up too. This is the orange one there from Sinclair. It says, everyone is saying that we won't get him. I agree we won't, because we ain't going to magically find 130 million behind the sofa. My point is we need to try, we need to negotiate, sell as much deadwood as possible to go and make it happen.
Yeah, I think Alexander Isak wants Champions League football, and there's no point trying on a lost cause. In addition to that, who's to say it will be 130 million? It might be 150 million. It might be 170 million. The number I hear from Newcastle insiders is 150. But it's not a number acknowledged by interested clubs, which tells you that Newcastle have an internal valuation for kind of book purposes of Isak, but it doesn't mean they're quoting a figure, because the club's position is ultimately not for sale. And although true, if you sign Isak and you put him on a minimum 5-year contract, you divide the fee by 5, so it can still be quite palatable on the books. You've also got a £300,000 a week wage. I know Manchester United have had players on higher wages, so technically he fits into the wage structure, but add to the fact the player wants to play Champions League, and I think Isak to Manchester United would be highly unlikely. And as you rightly say in the super chat, they've got to be able to fund it as well. So I'm not aware of Isak being on Manchester United's radar, other than the fact that I think if you lined up every single football club in the world and said, do you appreciate Alexander Isak? Would you like Alexander Isak in theory? Of course they would say yes, but that's the same when Messi's at his peak, Ronaldo's at his peak, or any other top player in the world. We'd all dream of it. I'm sure if I went to my club, Leicester City, and said, are you interested in Alexander Isak? They'd go, yeah, in theory, but it doesn't mean that you're going to make any kind of progress. It's like me walking into a bar, prime 18-year-old Jacobs, and walking up to the hot blonde girl and being like, I'd like to date you. It doesn't mean she's going to entertain me, because there's plenty of better options. And I think that's the reality right now, that there's every single football club in the world that would love to court Alexander Isak, but there's very few that actually stand a realistic chance, and as importantly, have the finances to afford the deal. And unfortunately, in this context, bad metaphor, I know, Manchester United are the spotty, ugly Ben Jacobs, 18-year-old walking into a bar. And I think if they tried Alexander Isak, it would be a firm no.
Don't be so hard on yourself. You had a chance at that age with Margot Robbie. You had a chance. You've got to take your shot. No,
Prime 18-year-old me did okay. It's true.
I look at it this way, right? I do agree with you. I get where Harry's coming from. I would love Isak, but there is no point chasing a lost cause. It would be crazy. Marcus here with the super chat says, we've missed all the strikers for 2025. Please let's get the number 1 goalkeeper. A striker will have to wait until 2026. Villa have no other striker. Why would they sell him? Do you think this is also... Is this plausible by United? Could there be a situation where they say, we can't get a good enough 9, so let's put that money into a better goalie, or maybe a better player in midfield than we can currently afford, to actually improve or fix, more importantly than improve, fix another broken area? Is that plausible? Is what Mark is saying here potential? Is it on the cards, or are you hearing very firmly it will be a striker regardless.
Well, striker's the next priority, but it's not really about the number. It's about the value. So I don't think Manchester United are sitting there saying we can or can't spend X, because it's a fluid situation that will be informed by outgoings as well. It's more just value for money. They want to avoid paying this Manchester United tax. Some will say they did it with Brian Mbeumo because the first bid was a 45 million fixed fee and the last bid was a 65 million fixed fee. So you've gone up by 20, but they definitely don't want to be in this situation of overpaying. And therefore, it's not so much about what clubs value players at, it's whether it's palatable on the books and deemed internally as value for money. Regarding the goalkeeper, the only pushback I get from sources is there's not an acknowledgement that the goalkeeper situation is broken. So you still may see a scenario where Andre Onana remains. But it is very interesting that there was this loan bid for Emi Martinez, because even though nothing has been communicated to Onana, reading those reports, which I'm told are accurate, he will be thinking, wait a minute, if Emi Martinez and Aston Villa say yes to that move, he's not coming in as a number 2. So maybe we're just seeing the first sign of Manchester United picking between, are they trying for a number 1 or are they trying for a number 2? But I repeat what I said before. If they try for Emi Martinez or another number 1, it's a U-turn on their plan heading into the window, because actually for 6 months now, they've been looking at young number 2s and wishing still to back Onana. So we have these simultaneous talks, seemingly. The loan offer for Emi Martinez, that will have to be permanent if they want to proceed. And as I've reported before, and I think is quite well backed up now, the number that Aston Villa would be looking for is in excess of 30 million and might even be at 40 million. And I think on those terms, Manchester United will not do the deal. And the reason why Villa's valuation is that high is because Emi Martinez is well contracted. So what they've done is taken the 25 million asking price for Mike Maignan from Milan with 1 year left on his contract and said that Emi Martinez is equivalent to Mike Maignan. Villa will naturally bill him as even better than Mike Maignan. And he's still got 3 years left on the contract. So if Maignan is 25 million, even though Chelsea didn't bite at that price, then of course Aston Villa are going to be adding 10 or 15 million pounds onto the overall valuation. And at that number, I don't see Manchester United moving, even though, as I've said many, many times, Emi Martinez is open to a move to Manchester United. Villa fans haven't liked hearing that, but it's categorically true that the Martinez camp have been courting Manchester United. And actually, Manchester United have been a little bit cooler in the last 3 or 4 weeks on Emi Martinez, but now it seems they have made some kind of approach to Aston Villa in the last few days. Then you have Seny Laermans, who was the original kind of profile that Manchester United looked at in January and were continuing to shortlist in the build-up to this window, and talks are ongoing there. So we'll have to see what direction they choose to move in. But I think if they get significant budget, still that first priority is going to be a number 9 first.
Absolutely. Viewers, keep hitting that like button for us and make sure you're subscribing. We're going to try quite a lot of your super chats actually connects to the questions that I've written down for Ben, so we're going to go through them. The next 2 are very similar to each other. One from Lee Berman and one from Sofonda Cox. Sofonda Cox. I just read that out, didn't I? I just got caught. I just said it out loud and went, oh, I know what that word means. But he says, hi, Terry. In regards to Douglas Luiz situation, could you please ask Ben if there's anything that we can do? And so Fonda says, Douglas Luiz is leaving Juve, Ben. Could he be a target for us as well?
Yeah, again, I think Manchester United would need a midfield outgoing to move in that position. I've mentioned Wilfred and Didi before, Frank Onyeka as well, who may be surplus to requirements at Brentford. And Douglas Luiz is another player that was internally discussed. At the moment, I'm told it's Everton and West Ham who are moving. Manchester United like the idea of the other names I've mentioned. I'm not saying they're advanced or definitively will happen, but both of those profiles are available cheap in the market, and they have lower wages. With Douglas Luiz, wage is one of the issues, and the fact that the player wants to be ideally playing week in, week out. He could get those minutes at West Ham United and also Everton. And I think West Ham in particular are going to be one to watch, because I'm told Luiz likes the idea of going to London, and Edson Alvarez's future definitely has a question mark over it at West Ham. So it looks like other clubs are moving on Douglas Luiz at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Harry's back with us again. In terms of midfielders, though, we'll stick on midfield for a moment because we've seen maybe about 4 or 5 weeks ago the connections to Javi Guerra. Now there's reports he's rejected his new deal at Valencia. And of course, United's name in the Spanish press is linked to him again. Is there anything in that? Is that a target that you've heard that we're connected to? Or is it a little bit of maybe the agents of the player using United to help get a better deal from Valencia in Spain?
Yeah, I think there's an element of gamesmanship going on here, although what is true is Javi Guerra has turned down a formal offer of a new contract at Valencia. And as a consequence, the market's been alerted to a possible opportunity. The only sort of pushback I get is, again, coming back to Kobbie Mainoo. And like I said in my last answer, I think you would need a midfield outgoing for Manchester United to move for someone like Douglas Luiz or Javi Guerra. And I'm not aware of anything advanced for either of those players at the moment. And my expectation remains that Kobbie Mainoo will stay and ultimately sign a new deal. If that doesn't happen or any progress made whilst the window is open, then suitors may decide to inquire on Mainoo, another, in inverted commas, pure profit player. But right now, I'm told Mainoo wants Manchester United. Manchester United still want to strike a new deal with Mainoo. And I think if a player like Guerra arrived, you would need a significant outgoing first. So this is one, absolutely, as you say, that is being fueled in the Spanish press. Maybe it's a case of no smoke without fire, but when I ask Manchester United sources, he's not really a name I'm hearing that much movement towards, at least as it stands. Let's wait and see what happens throughout the rest of the window, though. But if they are to find funds, I know it sounds like a broken record, number 9 first, maybe then they revisit the goalkeeper situation. Still a chance another fullback arrives, especially if they're versatile and can also double up at centre-back. And then regarding a 6 or a central midfielder or a 6-8, yes, it's possible, but I still think you need an outgoing in the centre of the park first.
I hear that. I want to say to King Ragnar and to GGMU, you've asked about will a striker, will a goalkeeper, will a CM come in, and would you bet on United again for a number 9? Appreciate the super chats. I think Ben's kind of already answered those, so we're not going to make him repeat himself again. You can go back and watch that in the show. This here from Harry Sinclair. He says, hey, Ben, what about Marcus Thuram? Also, in terms of young players, what about Richard Kone at Wycombe Wanderers? He has a high ceiling. I don't know who that man is personally, but maybe you do. Yeah, I mean, you've kind of, Thuram's not a name we're linked to. I don't think Inter have got any interest in selling him. So, I mean, it's those kind of deals.
That's the main point. Yeah. Very difficult to prize away.
Which means they're very expensive. And if you've got that kind of money, you might as well just bid for one of your main targets. So, yeah, it's unlikely that we're going to do that.
Yeah. What I'd say as well, because everyone gets excited about speculation, and naturally as journalists, we like to give you the latest, and it will always be a new target, no doubt, every week. But I think the key thing in all of this is Manchester United's summer was never intended, because of their PSR position, to be about 6, 7, 8 through the door. So the fact that they've done 2 bits of significant early business in Cunha and Mbeumo, both in time for the US preseason tour, that's the Manchester United window on track. Regarding the perspective of Christopher Vivell, Jason Wilcox, and ultimately Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Omar Barada, will there be a number 9 in likelihood? Will it be deemed to be a failure if they don't find a number 9? I think so. Are outgoings vital? Yes. And we're going to hear a lot of sort of looping of that messaging, because essentially if Man United get a number 9, they might feel that their window is relatively close to being completed. If they can add in the centre of the park, they could. Another defensive reinforcement possibly, and then either a number 1 goalkeeper or a young goalkeeper, depending on which way they go. And I think that's the skeleton of the window. But this is not an Arsenal type window. This is not a Liverpool type window. This is not a Manchester City type window. And the model is not quite like Chelsea's, where they'll be opportunistic to several young talents and may pivot. There feels like a very clear Manchester United plan, which I think is a good thing. And as a consequence, if they do get a number 9 through the door, as much as we like excitement and movement and who's next, I think there has to be an element of caution about how quickly and aggressively, financially speaking, Manchester United will act in the market. And you know that sort of phrase, the king is dead, long live the king, that you always hear in movies. Transfer market is always like that with fans. You sign a player and then the whole narrative is dead because the player's signed. And then the next morning people wake up and say, who's the next one? Who's the next one? Who's the next one? But I don't think this is a Manchester United window where there's just a big queue of people coming through the door. I think they've got that clear skeleton plan. And actually, if they can get as many as they can between now and the beginning of the window in the positions that I mentioned, from there, I think it would be seen as a good and successful yardstick of this new Manchester United of being quicker in the market and more disciplined. If they could actually get to the last 2 weeks of the window and be in a position where they can do absolutely nothing. And if that is the new approach, it tells you that this be disciplined, do business early, and have very refined targets is maybe a point of difference to how they were acting in previous windows under the old ownership, where certain sagas were dragging on, succeed or fail. And there were several names being linked and approached with maybe not as much of a specific plan.
It's a very, very fair point. I think last year, Man United's website did a bit of survey, and we were linked last summer to 197 different players. And maybe there was a lot of truth to those links as well at times. Christian Patey says, anybody is for sale at the right price. This is very, very true. Cesco Guerrera, Mamad, I can't say his name, but him. 3 young players that would be good would work for around 105 million for all 3. It's a great point. This here from Anoop, who says, Ben, I'm surprised why United have started internal discussions. We already have better players, better people taking decisions. Isn't it bad that we are still taking an average 3 weeks for any deal like before? We should have anticipated sales will be bad.
I think in answer to that, the Jason Wilcox and Christopher Vale strategy is, again, to be disciplined in the market, and that will include walking away from deals. I don't think Manchester United have been that slow in the market. I know the Mbumo deal dragged on, but part of that was down to Brentford as well. They did Cunha very quickly, partially because the clause was clear and therefore the payment terms. But Manchester United's number 1 priority was to back Ruben Amorim with Premier League experience and find 2 number 10s. They've done that. So the idea now that everything's going to take weeks, that the market is stagnated for Manchester United, that they don't have a clear plan, I just don't think that's reflected in what they're doing. Maybe last summer was a poor reflection on this new ownership because of the whole Ten Hag situation, the feeling he might go, followed by him staying, and then ultimately Ten Hag being sacked. And that was crucial because it overshadowed the whole window due to the fact that, unlike Ruben Amorim, Ten Hag had a recruitment veto and therefore could roadblock any deals that maybe the wider ownership wanted to do. So it felt like in that summer they bought for Ten Hag. And then, of course, there was the Dan Ashworth situation, which further complicated things, including the stability of the recruitment model. But now I actually think everyone at Manchester United sees this summer as window 1 under their new plan, window 1 under Jason Wilcox, window 1 under Ruben Amorim, even though technically that's not the case. It's window 1 in inverted commas because of the fact that last summer was so disrupted. Jason Wilcox has only just stepped up to his new role. And as importantly, Ruben Amorim didn't want the job mid-season, but Manchester United's such a big club that when he was told it was take it or leave it and had to go mid-season, there was simply no choice. And as a result of that, Ruben Amorim always thought in his own head he would need this first summer and full pre-season to really get going at Manchester United. So I think we have to look at this project and everything that's being done as still in its formative stages. And that's why I think if you compare it to other projects that have tried to do a similar plan, because we know Jim Ratcliffe likes the idea of Chelsea's kind of model. We know he's in favour of multi-club. We know he's got a lot of respect for City Football Group. If you go back and look at the first windows under those new owners, did they sign a Cunha and Mbumo? No, Chelsea signed a Raheem Sterling type player and it ended up not working. They brought a Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and that didn't work either. And it was probably only a year and a half into Chelsea's project, that we really started to see a clear recruitment strategy. Personally, I see quite a clear plan for Manchester United. I know I'm not a fan, and therefore, as a journalist, I'll be more balanced and dispassionate, but I can fully understand what they're trying to do. And I think it will probably pay off, whether that's this season or this window. Let's see. But having Cunha and Mbeumo through the door by the time they fly off to America, that for me feels like a pretty good start to this summer.
Absolutely. This here from Sofonda. Hello. Says, thank you, Ben, for the update, and Terry for reading my name. Not a problem. This here from Chemix says, great show, lads. Always great to see Ben. This here, the next one here from Arose, says, with no extra signings, what is the expected lineup? I mean, look, you can, I think there's multiple options for the lineup. We're probably not going to go through that now. What about Tolisso? I heard we were linked to him. That sounded to me, Ben, like one of those being offered to Man United jobs rather than Man United being offered to him.
Yeah, nothing really to add there. Again, another name that hasn't really come up in conversations that I've had with sources. Full respect for other reporting, but really not something that I'm aware of. I think coming back to the 11, Terry, you should give your 11. It's not really my job as a journalist to say what the best 11 is, but you could give your best 11 as of now.
I mean, look, as of now, goalkeeper, I'd put Tom Heaton in, to be honest with you. I think he's better than the other two. The back line, the back three, I'd go Lenny Yoro right, De Ligt middle, Heaven on the left-hand side, Martinez when he's back fit. Midfield, I'd go with a double pivot of, right now I'd go Ugarte and Mainu. And then fullbacks would be Ahmad and Dorgu. I would slightly change the attack up if we don't get a number 9. I would put Bruno in the 10 and then put Mbeumo and Cunha as like 9s ahead of him, but they can also drop deep, and then Bruno can box crush, which he's pretty good at doing. That would be my suggestion right now. I don't think the manager's going to do it, but that would be what I would do without a brand new number 9 coming in. I'd rather not play with Rasmus Højlund, with all due respect to him. I'd rather use him as an impact sub if that's what we end up having to do. So that's what I would do. Notorious here says, spending 90 million on a striker is about as useful as spending 90 million on a water boy. Either way, they would be both sat there watching our midfield get overrun. Do you know what I'm going to say to that, Notorious? I did a little thought exercise earlier and went back and looked and reviewed games that we narrowly lost or drew last year, where we actually had more shots, where we missed abundance of chances, where we didn't have goal scorers. It's conceivable that United could have had 20 to 30 extra points last year with goal scorers like Cunha and Mbeumo and maybe an Ollie Watkins. There was many a game, right, but as early as the 2-1 defeat to Brighton, where we were the better team in the second half, equalised, didn't get the second goal, conceded late. There was the West Ham game that led to us actually sacking Ten Hag, where we should have been 3-0 up, ended up losing 2-1. So for me, I do want the midfield to improve, but the idea that if we add 40 to 50 extra goals to this team in signings, the idea that won't improve us, I do disagree with that personally. This is says Martinez gives Barthez vibes, best at international level, errors in him, strong personality, good keeper, but a bridge to a better one. I think that's a fair assessment in many people's eyes. Could we be going for Justin Kluivert or Raheem Sterling? Oh God, I hope not. Not Raheem, Kluivert maybe.
Yeah, just on Justin Kluivert, he was looked at by Leverkusen as well. And naturally, Bournemouth feel in a very strong position. They don't want to sell the player. I think from Kluivert's point of view, he might be open to a move that has some kind of European or Champions League football. Doesn't apply to Manchester United next season. But when players say they want European football, it's important to note not all of them mean imminently. Some just want to join a project that can have it regularly over the course of their contract length. But it was only really Leverkusen that I'd heard for Justin Kluivert, and Bournemouth sources were absolutely insistent that they simply didn't want to sell. And I think for Bournemouth, there's loads of players that clubs like. Zabanyi is another one being looked at by both PSG and Tottenham Hotspur too. But now Bournemouth have sold Dean Howson. I think they're going to want to try and keep hold of as many of their players as they can. And therefore, it might be quite difficult to prize somebody like Kluivert away. We're not really talking about Manchester United here. It's a broader conversation. Semenya has signed new terms, so he's staying at least for another season. And therefore, if Sabanyi's the one to go, with PSG still active and pushing, I think anybody trying for Kluivert after that, if this deal comes off, is going to struggle to make any headway with Bournemouth.
Great update there on that. Since the takeover, what grade would I grade them? I'd give a C- right now. That being said, it's for me. I always said I'd give them a 2 to 3 year period before giving them a full grade. Sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees. There were Chelsea fans only 3 months ago saying Clear Lake sell them. Now they're saying we are world champions, and I think it's very important sometimes to remain level-headed. We haven't kicked a ball yet this season. I do get why United fans are angry, though. I do, and there's lots of things that have happened that people don't like. This year says this.
Terry, what I would say is that the way I judge it is Mbeumo Cunha. If you just replayed last season, how many more goals and how many more points? And it's hypothetical, I know, but it's quite a fun exercise. Is it 10? Is it 15? Is it 20? Is it 25? If it's 25, Man United would be finishing in the top 5. And I look back to so many games from last campaign that Manchester United lost, where they were toothless in front of goal, or even drew and failed to score. I think of in September away at Crystal Palace or Aston Villa that both finished 0-0. I think of the losses to Bournemouth at home, Wolves and Newcastle, even away at Spurs in February, where chances were spurned. There was the home game late in the season at home to Wolves. And how many times historically, someone far cleverer than me, did Manchester United under Sir Alex Ferguson fail to score a goal at Old Trafford? And yet, if you only look at the last few games of the season, which are the only ones I can remember off the top of my head, there was a 0-0 draw against Man City. That one, I believe, was at Old Trafford. There was a 1-0 loss to Wolves. There was a 2-0 loss to West Ham United. And I'm sure if you go back further through the season, there'll be a stat here about how many times at Old Trafford did Manchester United fail to score? And how many times did that happen under Sir Alex Ferguson? I struggle to think, if you replayed last season with Mbeumo in the side and Cunha in the team, that there would be as many games, particularly at home, where one of those two doesn't get on the score sheet. So my read is that Manchester United are going to get 15, 20 more points just because of those two signings that they've made. And therefore, if they can add a number 9 or strengthen in other areas, of course, it's important because it's about chemistry, it's about depth. But fundamentally, are Manchester United going to get more points because of the two they've already got through the door, and significantly more points and goals? And my opinion, and it's worthless because who really cares about what Ben Jacobs thinks as a journalist predicting hypothetically last season? But I do think those two will make a difference.
But looking at look, Man United fans that are angry, I get they might not want to have that conversation. Rivals will just push it aside and go, you can't analyze football like that. But that's how all clubs do their own analyzing. They look at Arsenal have looked at last season, looked at the games they were leading and didn't win, and they're looking to add attacking players and goals and more control in the middle to make sure they can kill those games off. Liverpool will assess last season and say, how can we go to that next level? How can we score more goals? They're also assessing how in the aggregate they can replace Mo Salah in 2 to 3 years and maintain his goals, his match-winning performances, to maintain the win percentage or the points gained. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to win the league. But to win the league, you've got to get a certain amount of points. How do you get the points? You've got to win the games. What goes wrong in our football matches that stops us winning games? Football clubs will analyze this in exactly the same way businesses trying to achieve sales targets will do things. In exactly the same way doctors and people in the pharmaceutical and medicine world will assess illnesses and work out, well, how do we get people better? Some things, some medicines you're given for the symptoms, other practices and other medicines are for solving the actual issue, but they all work in a very similar and methodical way. You have to kind of have a plan. The plan can't just be win the league. The plan's got to be, well, we've got to stop conceding as much. We've definitely got to score more. That will lead to this amount of points. It will put us there. That means more money. It means we can address this. It means we get back into Europe. It means we can do Y. So I do agree with assessing it in that way. This here says, sell the women's team, yeah, that's what we should do. We should sell the women's team for 300 million and we'll be all right.
Yeah, I mean, look, it can be a possibility, but it's kind of complicated because Ineos are minority owners at the football club. But there could be a scenario where the women's team is sold to Ineos, and that could be part of a bookkeeping tactic. Aston Villa have done it. Chelsea have done it. You never know, but it's a little bit more complicated because Jim Ratcliffe has sporting control, but not majority control of the football club. So were they to sell the women's team to Ineos, you would then have a situation where Ineos own 100% of the women's team. The Glazers own the majority of Manchester United. What happens if a new investor came in or Sir Jim Ratcliffe left or the Glazers just want to stay? You might have a divide in terms of ownership, presenting legal issues between the men's team and the women's team. And the Glazers would ultimately have to endorse that sale to Ineos. I don't see it being sold anywhere else within the structure and the hierarchy of the group.
And this is why it's not, this is where I get called like an Ineos sympathizer. It's not as simple as Ineos just doing it. It's like paying the debt off. I think there's a possibility if they were able to, they'd pump more money in and pay the debt off. The issue is the Glazers will not relinquish more power, as in more shares, for debt being paid off because they're not getting any money. They're not going to allow Ineos to buy the women's team if that money isn't being fed into their pocket. They're not going to give up another percentage of the club if they're not making money. This here it says, so this is also says, Vlahovic rumors seem to have died down, is what Awkward Citizen says here. Yeah, they certainly have.
Yeah, I don't really know where the Vlahovic stories came from originally. Again, not a name that's ever been significantly acknowledged by Manchester United sources. Juve have added Jonathan David, so there could be a window of opportunity. But a lot of the clubs in the Premier League that have looked at Vlahovic are less sure that he's robust enough necessarily to take to Premier League football without potentially being injury prone. There's been a consistent groin injury issue for Vlahovic. Luckily, in the last 6 months or so, he's been able to play quite consistently. But I don't think Manchester United have ever seriously explored Dusan Vlahovic, and it can be said exactly the same for Chelsea as well. Just not a name I've ever heard particularly acknowledged as being on United's radar. Let's see now, we're sort of past the Dan Ashworth planning era and he's left. We're into the Wilcox and Vivell double act, and they may have different targets and feelings about what Manchester United need. But I think the long-standing rumours with Manchester United and Vlahovic were never really backed up by sources during the time of Dan Ashworth or when Erik ten Hag was at the club.
That's fair. Jahid Mia here says, big up Terry. Can you ask him, it's Ben?
Him is fine.
Will we make any more signings even after the season starts? If so, what's the most important signing this season for Amorim?
Yeah, the season starting is not the deadline. The deadline is September the 3rd. So, of course, clubs may choose to utilise the window. As I said before, I don't think Manchester United want to run right to the wire with incomings, but everything can change once the season starts. You can see an urgent need. You can pick up an injury. You can have an outgoing that prompts you to move. So everyone's going to use the window if they feel the need to. We can't say once they kick a ball against Arsenal that that's the end of the window because the deadline's September the 3rd. But I come back to what I said before. In an ideal world, Manchester United want to do their business early. And if they can do that and find the number 9 sooner rather than later and facilitate the necessary outgoings, then if it is a quiet end to the window, it wouldn't be a bad thing, providing that number 9 comes in. And then there may be these other positions, possibly midfield, fullback and goalkeeper, whether number 1 or number 2, as we've discussed earlier in the show.
Anoop here says, this window seems different with all top 4 teams spending big. Could you analyze what changed, why PSR is not applicable to Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea? Over 1 billion spent already by top 4 teams every year. Top 4 reward is the same, right?
Well, PSR is applicable because everyone's got the same threshold. And if anyone goes over that threshold, they're in breach of PSR. But a lot of these big 6 clubs have got more revenue. They've got some cases multi-club and ability to do what Chelsea did and sell assets. In other situations. They've stockpiled funding to have big windows, or they structure the deals in clever ways, with amortization being a very popular target now. So I don't think we can collectively add up the spend and assume everyone's got the same strategy, or somehow they're subverting PSR. In Manchester City's case, there's been a clear need to back Pep Guardiola because of the season that they had last campaign. In the case of Liverpool, they've saved up money. They put down a serious British transfer record fee at the time for Moises Caicedo, but he went to Chelsea. They put big money on the table for Romeo Lavia, and he went to Chelsea. And although they did the midfield revamp, there's plenty of money saved up that FSG are now allowing Richard Hughes to spend. And some of that even dates back to Jude Bellingham, where there was allocated budget, but Liverpool realised very quickly that he was going to Real Madrid. So there's points of differences. Liverpool wanted to resolve the internal situations when Arne Slot first joined and have some continuity with Jurgen Klopp. But a year on as Premier League champions, they're spending money that they've saved up for quite some time. But this will not be an every window occurrence for Liverpool Football Club. Man City have a bit more urgency and a new sporting director. Same for Arsenal. Both those sporting directors want to get business done fast and quickly. Arsenal have had previous windows where they have been a bit tighter with PSR, which is why, for example, the David Raya deal was structured in the manner that it was. But now they feel more comfortable. Then you have in Liverpool's case, the fact they closed their financial year in May. So everything from June is on the next financial year. That's allowed them to move quicker and more aggressively because they're not worried about balancing the books. They're fine for PSR, and everything they're doing now is all ultimately about the next financial year. With Arsenal, they closed their financial year on June the 30th. So this is why we've seen a slightly slower start for Arsenal, but it's really got going all of a sudden because we're into the new financial year and they've been able to put Victor Gyökeres on the books. So every club is acting differently, and I certainly wouldn't combine them all and assume that there's an advantage to only big six clubs, because West Ham have sold Mohamed Kudus. Now they're going to get moving. Everton have been very aggressive in the market under the Friedkin Group as they look to go into their new stadium with stars.
Yeah. And Newcastle have tried. I don't mean it rudely. They've just missed out on loads, but they've tried to sign loads of players. So the money's there. One thing I've noticed though, Ben, someone who's I've covered transfers now for a decade quite intensively as a fan, is I feel a lot of the top players are being sold for 20 or 30 million pound less than what was being quoted a year or two ago. What I'm seeing is I'm seeing more buyout clauses, and I'm seeing less players now. Tottenham were famous for this with Dele Alli, Kane. Every 18 months, it was like a new deal to keep extending the contract. And then if anyone wanted them, it was ridiculous money. Mohamed Kudus, there were quotes of 80 to 90 million 2 years ago, went for 55 million. The players are now learning to not sign these new deals. So everyone's getting down to the last 2 or 3 years of their contract. So they're affordable at a 50 to 60 to 65 million range, where I think if 18 months ago they'd all renewed respectively with their current clubs, their clubs would be saying, because if Mbeumo had 5 years remaining on his deal, 4 years remaining, they'd have asked for 100 million. And Man United wouldn't have been able to have done it. They would have priced him out a move, and a lot of these deals wouldn't have happened. So I think what we're seeing is a changing in the transfer fees again, because the players are realizing, don't sign that new deal and trap yourself in for too long, because you know the bigger clubs are going to come looking for you. So I think it's all kind of played its part at the same time, all of this.
I think also Newcastle United, as you say, have shown great ambition, but they're in a different pool now because they are competing often for targets against big six clubs or European giants. And that's a backhanded compliment to them in many ways. And you're not always going to win each of those races. And I think it's less about, do Newcastle have the finances for the fees, and more about, are they prepared to break their wage structure? And naturally, like with you or me, if you're being offered Newcastle with Champions League football or Chelsea with Champions League football, and it's a like-for-like football pitch in terms of what they've got, but Newcastle's wage bill perhaps won't go above 200,000, and Chelsea are prepared to go to 250, maybe, with some players, we're speaking hypothetically, then the increased package on the player side will lead a lot of those targets to say, maybe I'll pick a Chelsea now and come back to Newcastle when I see they've got back-to-back Champions League football and are prepared to break their wage structure further. And the last point, coming back to the question, is a Newcastle United at the moment, and to an extent a Manchester United do not have the same kind of outgoings to offset this volume of business. So Man City can still command a fee for Grealish or even a Calvin Phillips in the past. I know he ended up going on loan, but still the valuation for those players was there. Cole Palmer was sold for 40 million. James McAtee is available for 40 million. Liverpool have got Luis Diaz. They're asking for something in the region of 60, 65, maybe even 70 million pounds. Darwin Nunez has a valuation of 60 million pounds. Jarrell Quansah was sold for 40, 45 million pounds. At the moment, if we bring it back to Manchester United, you've only really got pure profit in Manu and Garnacho. They don't want to sell Garnacho for under 60 million, and they want to try and keep Manu. They haven't got their 40 million for Rashford. They didn't get their obligation to buy from Chelsea for Jadon Sancho, and that price is only 20, 25 million. If they get more money for Rasmus Højlund, it will likely be a book loss. So even if you bring in the funds, that's not ideal either. So this is why these clubs like Man City, Chelsea, Arsenal can move, because they have the ability, if they need to, somewhere down the line, whether now or in future windows, to bring in that kind of funds. Manchester United don't have as many. They have a lot of players on high wages that are beneficial to get off the books, but certainly not able at this stage or willing at this stage to generate the same kind of income. And it will be, at the end of the day, down to two-way business when these clubs are spending in the tune of 200, 250, 300 million. So Chelsea haven't done their outgoings yet, but the outgoings will be offset by the fact that they've spent a lot in the market. Man City haven't done all of their outgoings yet, but maybe they'll pull in 80, 100 million still in players that they're prepared to sanction exits for. Newcastle, Man United, not quite in the same ballpark with how much player income they either can bring in or are prepared to bring in. And obviously in Manchester United's case, there's loads of players that are worth 40, 50, 60 million. They could have sold Bruno Fernandes to Saudi Arabia for probably 100 million, but Fernandes didn't want to go. So there's different scenarios for each club. It's very easy as a fan to look at all the other clubs and say they've all somehow got an advantage. But I think the context and the specifics of how each model for each club runs is really important to understand.
Absolutely. Harry says here with a super chat, I don't know if you found this out already, but I just counted. We failed to score in 8 home games last season. And that's a massive thing. And a lot of those matches, and even some of the games we did score in, Arsenal at home last year, we were the better team. We really should have put that game to bed. Should have scored late on 3 or 4 big chances. Didn't. There'll be some different results next year. Ali here says, Terry, sorry if this was discussed earlier in the show, but if we can't buy a number 9, would it be possible to loan Jackson as an only option, like only a loan option?
I mean, maybe there is a scenario where there's 2 loans and Chelsea look to loan Garnacho with an optional obligation and ask for a player to come the other way. We know Manchester United have also looked at Christopher Nkunku. At this stage, that conversation just hasn't happened. So all options in theory are possible before no options are discussed. But we're jumping the gun a bit in the same way that people jump the gun about Alexander Isak for all clubs at the moment, because every single fan wants a player of that caliber. So naturally, as a journalist, we have to rein fan emotion in sometimes when we come on these platforms and we're asked these questions, because there are a lot of hypotheticals. There are a lot of possibilities that may materialize. But I think we need to keep Manchester United and Jackson, Manchester United and Nkunku just at a bit of distance for now, because the clubs haven't actually started any conversations. Is it possible in theory? Yes. Is there a structure with two-way business that might benefit both clubs? Yes. But again, they haven't yet decided definitively what striker they want to go for at the Manchester United end. And for Chelsea and Garnacho, he's appreciated, but the one they're working on at the moment is Xavi Simons.
There we go. Viewers, get like buttons hit. Make sure you're subscribing. Liam here says if the Scousers get Isak and Rodrigo, just end the Prem. Well, that's what. Listen, there's more pressure on them to win now. It makes it even more fun. I want to thank every single person who's tuned into this show. Make sure listen, one bone to pick with you, 12,000 people watching, only 1,600 likes. That is an abomination to Ben. So make sure you get that like button hit now before you. It's an abomination. Get the like button.
I don't know what the normal likes are. I don't know whether when Mark's here, when you're here, when Beth's here, the likes have different levels.
I don't know.
It
might be because I'm here. It might be because I'm here. I don't like liking him. Aim for 50%. Let's get 6,000 likes on this stream, people. Let's get it done right now. The United Stand is back 8 p.m. tonight, as you know, so be here for that. Ben and I, we're live tomorrow actually on the Football Terrace. What time are we doing? We haven't decided yet.
Yeah, we haven't decided. Probably a conversation we should have offline rather than bore people with logistics.
Yeah, we'll do that tomorrow. It'll be late morning, early afternoon, no doubt, tomorrow on the Football Terrace, where we're covering all teams. But thank you, everybody. Until next time, take care, goodbye, God bless, and we'll see you all again very, very soon. Peace.